Welcome back, everyone. I'd like to introduce the moderator for our next panel in the time of gig work. This panel is being moderated by Shuddhabrata Sengupta. Shuddha is an artist, writer, and curator who has been working with the Rux Media Collective since it was founded in 1992 in New Delhi, India, by Sengupta together with Monica Nirula and Jibesh Bakshi.
Thank you, Gulmeher. And thank you very much to Khoj and the Goethe Institute for organizing this fantastic conference. I'm in a kind of blurry transit zone, having arrived yesterday from very far away and departing tomorrow for very far away. But I would do this only for Khoj and the Goethe Institute. So thank you. When Gulmeher was introducing me, I thought, here comes the revenge of the 20th century. Because I know we discussed this morning these fantastic presentations where it was demonstrated that the 20th century is well and truly over, but maybe not quite. Maybe even the 19th century is not yet over. And at the beginning of the second quarter of the 21st century, it's interesting to go back to 1858 and to read a note in a book called The Grundrisse, which was never meant for publication, by Karl Marx, and something called A Fragment on Machines, where he talks about actually this very tense relationship between the abstraction of labor power that is the apparatus that controls labor, and the tension between what he calls the will and the general intellect. And the intellect is what is actually encapsulated in the body of the operations that govern the work of the worker. And that includes gig and platform work of all times, but it goes right back to Taylorism. It goes right back to the automation of the production process and what Marx has always called the theft of labor time. The theft of the time of the worker. And if you talk to gig and platform workers, I'm sure that you will recognize that there is a recognition of the fact that time is stolen. The time of life is stolen, such that the first major strike action on a countrywide basis that occurred of gig and platform workers was on the 25th of December, very strategically on Christmas Day, where there was an attempt to say, we're not going to work under this under 10-minute rule that Blinkett was trying to enforce. There was a note from the Labour Ministry that said, yes, this may be waived, so Blinkett does not any longer, and nor do the other platforms, promise to deliver within 10 minutes. But the speed factor has not gone away. Even after this, just as recently as the first day of this year, a worker died in Hyderabad trying to make a delivery because he was speeding. And I've been following worker deaths over the last 10 years, gig worker deaths, last 10 months. And there have been more than 10 such deaths, and they're important for us to consider. Before we go on, I just want to mark that today is a full moon. And yesterday we saw a nearly full moon, and it's a very special full moon because it is the Jayanti of Guru Ravidas, who is in fact not just someone who completely spoke against the annihilation of, spoke for the annihilation of caste, and promised a path to what he called Begumpura, which is the place without sorrow, but also spoke consistently about the autonomy of the worker, because he was himself a shoemaker. And, in Plato, the very famous example of why people who produce should never be citizens is centered around shoemakers, because they never have the time to think about anything else than the making of shoes. And here was the shoemaker who said, no, the making of shoes is my thinking and laboring activity. It is my self-consciousness embodied in protecting your feet. So just to make a nod towards Guru Ravidas and the fact that there are traditions in this part of the world that teach us that work is something that we must take more seriously. I think all our major philosophical traditions undervalue work and think that the body of the worker is actually of real. But here is somebody who says work, caste, class, and the production of the material world is very important. And as someone who stood for the autonomy of the worker, I think he's a great person to think about, the gig worker. We have a great panel, 4 great presentations. Aditi Surie, David Brazier, Tara Kelton, and Yatharth. The booklet really summarizes their contributions, and because we're running against time, I'll advise you to look at the booklet. But suffice to say that from Aditi, who's a sociologist, to the others who are artists and practitioners of different kinds, we have a fantastic assemblage of ways of thinking about work. Just to note 2 words that came up in the previous panel. One was concealment, and the other was culture. And I want to end my prefatory remarks by saying that a large part of the discourse around gig and platform work is actually about concealment. The concealment that this is actually labor, right? And both to the consumer who benefits, who acquires the service, and to the worker, because there's a consistent effort to say to the gig worker that they're not in fact workers, that they're entrepreneurs, managing their own time. And the other thing is culture. So I don't know if anyone noticed this strange coincidence. After it was announced that this 10-minute rule would no longer be mandatory, the CEO of a company called Eternal, which owns the companies called Zomato and Blinkit and several other such operations, a man called Deepinder Goyal. And if you don't know anything about him, I urge you all to think about him. He's our very own Delhi IIT bred Elon Musk. He wears a little thing on his head that's monitoring his thoughts. He resigned from the CEO-ship of Eternal. I think perhaps in rage, but the reasons were not specified. He's written a book, which I urge you all to read. I read this kind of stuff. The book is called Culture. And Deepinder Goyal tells you what culture is, in case you didn't know. It was written for the Zomato management staff. Somebody picked it up and thought that this would be great for everyone to read. The first line in the book says, "The rules are that there are no rules." Now, fascinating. The rules are that there are no rules, disruption, chaos from within the heart of the new capitalism. But the rules also are that if you happen to be a gig worker for Blinkit or Zomato, there are lots of rules. Right? There are rules about delivery, there are rules about time, there are rules about appearance. There are rules about your presentation of self, your cheerfulness, right? Which is why we all click on the smiley face when we get a delivery or something like that. So not only is a gig worker condemned to be running against time, condemned to be not taking pee breaks and tea breaks, they also have to be happy and cheerful all the time while they're doing this. That's the rule. But for the manager, the rules are that there are no rules, right? On that note, I will ask the first speaker of our panel, Tara Kelton, to come and make her presentation. Thank you very much.
Hello. Thanks so much, Shuddha. I'm looking forward to reading Culture very soon. Thank you so much to Pooja and Khoj and Mila for having me and being lovely hosts and organizing this. I am an Indian American artist and designer from Bangalore, which is the site of so much tech work in India. And in my work, I do experiments and collaborations with primarily informal digital labor, looking at the asymmetries of power built into the platforms we use every day. I don't work in any specific media, but typically my process is to insert myself into the system that I'm looking at and sort of mess around with it in different ways. I also co-edit a publication, an art project called Silicon Plateau, which explores the intersection of Technology, Culture, and Society in Bangalore. Each volume is themed and includes research artworks, interviews, and essays that observe how technology influences the urban environment and the lives of its inhabitants. Volume 3 will be out in 2 months. Please get in touch if you'd like a copy. So Bangalore is really at the center of my practice, and the sweeping technological changes that have happened in the city over my lifetime have really shaped my work. This was a project I made as a student at the height of the outsourcing boom. Western companies were outsourcing everything from call centers to data entry to software development to technical support, really benefiting from Indian labor at a fraction of the cost. And Bangalore, even then, was being radically reshaped. The city was replete with call center workers who were trained to sound with call centers, and workers were trained to sound American and work these long overnight shifts. So what I did in this project was I hired a sign painter who was performing as a typeface in real time. And so visitors to a gallery in New York could input letters or words, and those would be sent to the painter, who would then paint them in a close impression of Helvetica Bold, and then they would appear on the screen. So in one screen, you could use it kind of like a word processor, and then in another screen, you could see the painter. And it sort of confronted visitors there with this choice of, one, whether to use the labor or not, but it also made this usually invisible outsourced labor suddenly quite visible and uncomfortable. I have done a number of projects with crowdsourcing workers and specifically Amazon's Mechanical Turks over the years. This is a project from 2015. With this audience, I feel like everyone knows what crowdsourcing is, but just in case, crowdsourcing platforms connect businesses with workers around the world who complete small digital tasks for pennies. And some of the work is labeling images, transcribing audio, moderating content, or training AI systems lately. And this work is broken into tiny fragments and then reassembled. So the workers are anonymous and invisible to employers and only identified by random IDs. The workers are all over the world, but some estimates say as many as 30 to 50% of them are in India. And so in 2015, I started hiring them to draw themselves. And I created this interface that combined their drawings in real time, and each colored line is one of the workers drawing themselves. Just let that play for a second. So when Uber first came to India, they were trying to get market share like they've done in lots of economies. And the company was subsidizing rides, and huge numbers of drivers took loans to buy cars, following which someone in Silicon Valley changed the pay structure. And at the time, or at some point, banks were running out of space in their godowns to store the cars of drivers who had defaulted on their loans. And like many of the platforms we're dealing with, the company always favors the customer. If a passenger disputes a fare, the driver loses payment with no recourse. And the drivers only ever interact with algorithms and automating systems, never a human being. And so I started interviewing them, asking them to describe their employer with questions like, where is Uber? What does your employer look like? Etc. I then hired local DTP shops in Bangalore to visualize their descriptions using their existing digital libraries. Some of the descriptions were, a lot of descriptions were like a white man in a suit, surveillance cameras, but then some were more fantastical, like, a flying car, like these utopias, Uber Bazaar. And these corner graphic service shops, many of them are like direct descendants of historical photo studios, and you could see it in the imagery where there are like pedestals and curtains that I think you can trace back to that. So, yeah. Around 2021, there's been constant migration to Bangalore of people looking for work, and it's really changed the physical infrastructure of the city. And there are now these like seas of towers. And I also started to see advertisements everywhere for twin sharing rooms, which are these rooms that young IT migrant workers typically share. And I started collecting the advertisements, and I collected 1,000 of them into a single book. And what I was struck by was how they looked almost computer generated. They were so similar and kind of produced this really bleak picture of the kind of material conditions for the workers. Now I'm going to show you works from the last year where I have started looking at thinking about like rest and breaks and how they aren't built into any of this type of platforming gig work, and started exploring rest as a form of resistance or refusal. And these are mouse jiggler videos that I collected from YouTube that are these super fascinating counter surveillance tools that were created by anonymous users as a form of distributed resistance that offer extended periods of rest to remote workers around the world. Workers basically play the videos on their mobile phone or tablet and place it under their mouse, and it interferes with the functioning of the optical sensor. And so it allows them to go take a break while it's playing. And the length of the videos is between like 3 and 8 hours. And I was quite interested in how they were hosted on this video platform meant for humans, but are only intended for machine consumption. And they sort of function as this, I have a note here that says seizure warning, but now it's too late. It's too late now. So, but yeah, please look away if you need to. They made everyone sick in my last exhibition. But and I was also interested in how they're this kind of analog digital hybrid because they're a physical mechanism that sits outside of the system of the laptop and, the employer and their surveillance. Right. In a related project, I also started working with physical mouse jigglers, which are hardware devices available on Amazon. You can find them in like every Amazon Spain, Amazon America, Amazon India. And they are very popular, and remote workers basically place them under their mouse, and the devices physically turn and pause at certain moments and do the same thing where they move the mouse on screen, allowing them to take a break. I then purchased used smiley face stress balls from eBay, from physiotherapists, from blood banks. And I was thinking about them as these kind of containers of human tension in a physical form. And then finally, back to the click workers or crowdsourced workers. This is micro-rest. Over the years, since I started working with them, I've learned more and more about how terrible their working conditions are. Some are even in refugee camps or prison. It doesn't pay a living wage. The work is quite oppressive and has no context or meaning because it's all cut up into tiny parts. And I then started trying to be a Turk myself and really experience how difficult and oppressive the work is. While I was being trained, a timer counted backwards. as I completed each task, I only found out afterwards that my work was being rated. They don't disclose that. And the first task I embarked on, you had to do 1,000 tasks. If you failed to finish them, you wouldn't get paid, but the employer could still keep your labor. Anyhow, again, the system fully favors the employer over the worker. And nowadays, most of the work click workers do is training AI models to eventually make them obsolete, perhaps. So in this project, I've hired the click workers to do nothing and to just stop working. And a timer on screen clinically counts the workers and the amount of time they've rested. And then I also invite the viewer to donate rest themselves. And sort of, I guess part of this project, in addition to me trying to give them rest, is also thinking about, in the face of this unstoppable AI force, I was thinking about it almost as this kind of tiny David versus Goliath gesture of having the workers stop training AI and just do nothing. And the last few works are on view right now at the DLF Mall. It's part of Khoj's lovely exhibition. Thank you.
Hi everyone, and thank you, Khoj, for having me again. I think I'm going to have to have you guys over next time. It's getting a bit embarrassing. The work I'm going to show today is a video work. It was made on a Khoj residency in September last year, and it's an extracted kind of edited version of a series of interviews that I did with Blinkit workers. And I'm sure you're all extremely familiar with Blinkit, but in case you have just arrived from overseas and haven't been told, it seems to be the first thing that people kind of tell you about here. But Blinkit is essentially a quick commerce delivery platform which allows you to buy mainly groceries, but seemingly pretty much anything, and have it delivered to you in 10 minutes or 20 minutes now. So the video was part of a broader installation which also comprised of a water feature, a constructed water feature, which was in front of the projection and was used to kind of make use of Blinkit's own marketing campaign. In this instance, it was like paper boats, which were made from the Blinkit delivery bags, and so the audience was invited to follow the Blinkit instructions on the bags and make these boats and float them on the water in front of the projection of the riders. So I guess as far as Blinkit's concerned, this is a marketing campaign to sort of generate an image of being a very kind of fun, inclusive, creative, sort of sustainable company, and they're really good at doing that. But I think in the context of the video and what the riders were actually saying, the boat started to kind of enact this precarious and really fragile condition of contemporary gig work. So they sort of float in a system for a period of time, completely unanchored, eventually kind of taking on water, inevitably sinking, only to be sort of fished out and replaced by more boats, and the kind of cycle continued. So it was really interesting, or quite amazing how closely the conversations with the writers kind of echoed this cycle, in that they spoke of this notion of freedom, and then this overwhelming kind of sense of precarity and fragility, and then eventually this exhaustion and kind of entropy. So I think in terms of this video and the conversation that we'll have, I'll sort of focus on this notion of freedom, which really became central to what they talked about, and probably worth spending a little bit of time kind of unpacking, because, well, I guess before doing the interviews, I think I had a kind of an idea of what was going to be talked about by the writers, and I think I was quite surprised. I was kind of expecting this overwhelming critique of gig labour, and I guess from a left-leaning perspective, we look at it as incredibly opportunistic and exploitative, and it is. But I was kind of thrown by the fact that they had quite a few sort of positive things to say about it, and I think one of them was specifically around this notion of freedom and the freedom that this job supposedly gives them. I think it's probably important to kind of say that, because a lot of them spoke about how being able to choose your own hours was really important, and being able to take a sick day and nobody's actually going to say anything if you do that. For many of them, the wages they talked about were better than where they'd actually been working prior, and it was a form of employment that was always available to them. So some of them actually had no work. So there's a kind of systemic problem, which is, I guess, the gig economy is kind of parasiting on. And they also importantly talk about the kind of absence of a physical boss. So I think for many of them, that was a really important freedom from the kind of interpersonal sort of hierarchies that might be attached to caste and class. They were only really ever answerable to an algorithm. So kind of not having that, the physical boss standing over them, kind of dominating them and intimidating them or insulting them in any way was quite important to them. So, these are real kind of freedoms in a way, and I think, I think they're sort of they're material realities to an extent. But I think what's really kind of interesting looking at this type of work is how this freedom is so kind of closely entwined now with new forms of governance and control. So it's sort of weaponized and used to structure how gig workers or people in general kind of are forced to operate. And I think this tension was really, really clear in what the gig workers talked about, and you'll see in the video. So while they talked about the benefits of autonomy, they'd always sort of go on to contradict that by saying that their freedoms are very carefully managed and orchestrated by a series of incentives and penalties and constant surveillance and this kind of gamification of the app, of the platform, which kind of forced any kind of freedom of choice into really, really specific areas. So it's a kind of it's a freedom. It kind of creates like an autonomy of the worker, which generates a really very specific sense of self-management. So they're kind of forced to self-manage themselves and make these decisions, which, it's almost like a management of your own exploitation in a way, which I think is quite sort of insidious, the way it has been done. So that kind of autonomy, I guess, that they're given obviously encompasses all the risk and responsibility of the work. And a lot of the gig workers spoke about how they, have to buy their own bike. All the maintenance was on them to uphold. They had to pay for their phones. Even like blanket uniform and bags were going to come out of their first wage. So blanket sort of supplies absolutely nothing, and they made that quite specific. So, and if they have an accident, it's kind of on them. I don't know whether any of these rules have changed in recent times with what's happened, but essentially Blinkit and all of these kind of platforms relinquish all responsibility and kind of handed over to the worker. All the stress, all the risk is on them. So in the video, I'll show. I've extracted dialogue, I guess, where this ideas or this relationship between freedom and control has kind of become explicit. It's a little bit of a shame to do it, and because they did speak about a lot of other things which I think are really relevant to gig economy labour, but I've done it because we're limited by time, for one, but also because it kind of seems to me that this gig economy can't really be understood as simply just oppression or liberation, but it's kind of this system where autonomy and compulsion kind of become structurally entangled in a way, and freedom kind of emerges as this means for control. And I suppose it points towards new ways that power has been redistributed, and kind of new ways that capital and kind of labour have managed to respond to critique, absorb it, and kind of reinvent itself. So I'll show you the video now, and welcome to answer any questions during question time.
हम इस काम में कोई बंदा अपने मन से नहीं आता, इसकी कुछ ना कुछ मजबूरियाँ होती हैं। हाँ, तो अपनी भी मजबूरी थी, कोई जॉब ढंग के था नहीं। और इसमें क्या होता है, एक फैसिलिटी होती है, आप किसी के गुलाम नहीं हो कि आपको इतने घंटे काम करना है। आप अपने मन के काम करेंगे, जब चाहे तब करेंगे, कोई बोलने वाला नहीं कितने घंटे आगे काम करो नहीं करो, ठीक है। यही उसका फ़ायदा यही है कि इसमें किसी को आप गुलाम नहीं हो कि हमको काम करना ही करना है। आपको अगर तबीयत ख़राब है, आप सो जाओ, कोई नहीं बोलेगा।
ब्लिंकिट में मैंने शुरू इसलिए किया क्योंकि ये फील्ड की जॉब है एक तरीके से, डिलीवरी बॉय की। इसमें किसी तरीके का प्रेशर नहीं होता है, कोई आपको ये फ़ोन करके ये नहीं बोलता है कि भाई जल्दी कर, ऑर्डर दे फटाफट, ये वो, कोई ये चीज़ नहीं होता है। एक तरीके से फ्रीडम होती है, बंदा अपने अकॉर्डिंग काम करता है।
दूंगा अगर 13 घंटे दे दिया तो मेरे ही फ़ायदे हैं, और कुछ पीछे भी परेशानी है मेरी, वो भी मेरा हल हो जाएगा। तो इसलिए हम लोग कभी 13 घंटे भी दे देते हैं, 14 घंटे भी दे देते हैं। हमें कोई प्रेशर नहीं दे रहा, हम अपनी मर्ज़ी से कर रहे हैं। अगर हम करेंगे तो हमारे लिए फ़ायदा है।
तो अभी बाइक चलाता हूँ, मेरे पास बाइक है खुद की। तो ब्लिंकिट हमें कोई इसमें वो प्रोवाइड नहीं करता है किसी चीज़ के लिए। हम खुद, हमारा उसमें पेट्रोल चलता है, हमारे गाड़ी की सर्विसिंग रहती है, हमारा मोबाइल का जो रिचार्ज होता है, डाटा होता है, वो खुद की अपनी हमारी रहती है। उसमें कंपनी का कोई उसमें नहीं रहता है।
And it is not like you can work at any time. They fix a compulsory login time. So like for full day if we see, they have a compulsory login time like from morning 4 o'clock till 24 hours you have to complete 10 hours. You have to be compulsory login in Blinkit. And there is a compulsory login from 12 o'clock at afternoon till 4:30, and this duration you have to complete 3 hours. And the third compulsory login is starts from 6 o'clock in evening, and it goes till 12 o'clock and at night. You have to complete 4 hours in between. So yeah, these are compulsory logins. If we do not complete these compulsory logins, then some sort of money gets deducted from our pay.
किसी भी कंपनी में आप ब्लिंकिट ले लो या फिर स्विगी ले लो, अभी फ्लिपकार्ट, अमेजोन आ गया, सारे ने 10 मिनट का टाइमिंग दे दिया है, पर उन्हें नहीं पता है कि हम कितने प्रेशर से ये ऑर्डर लेके जा रहे कस्टमर के पास। बीच में अगर हमें जाम पड़ गई या फिर बारिश पड़ गई तो हमें ऑर्डर डिले होता ही है। ये नहीं कि हम 10 मिनट के अंदर आप पहुंचा देंगे। तो प्रेशर हमारा यही रहता है कि हमें भी, क्योंकि हमें टारगेट लेके चलना होता है, तो हमें भी प्रेशर रहता है कि हम कस्टमर को जल्दी से जल्दी ऑर्डर दें ताकि हम दूसरा ऑर्डर ले सकें और हमारे जो टारगेट है वो बन सकें। यही है।
ऑर्डर हम जल्दी डिलीवर नहीं कर पाते तो हमको टेंशन होता है, क्योंकि हम उसी के लिए आते हैं कि जितना जल्दी हम डिलीवर करते जाएं उतना हमारा फ़ायदा हो, इंसेंटिव मतलब अर्न होता जाएगा।
तो हम जो काम करते हैं, अगर हमारी कोई गिग खराब हो गई या फिर हम ऑर्डर डिले जा रहे हैं हमारा ऑर्डर, तो हमें 3 उसमें मतलब वो रहता है, स्टेप रहता है एक ब्लू का होता है, एक सिल्वर का मेडल रहता है, एक डायमंड का रहता है। तो जो बेटर करता है उसे डायमंड मिलता है, और जो उससे नीचे काम करता है उसे सिल्वर और ब्लू में मिलता है। तो हमारा रेट बढ़ते घटते रहता है, जैसा काम करते हैं उसी के हिसाब से हमें रेट बढ़ाते हैं, और वो हमें डायमंड तक लेके जाते हैं। अगर हम डाउन काम करते हैं, डिले हमारा ऑर्डर होता है, तो हमें ब्लू स्टार भी दिया जाता है।
मुझे ये लगता है ना कि ये 12 आवर्स जो है ना, ये बहुत ज़्यादा है। ये जॉब कम से कम मिनिमम 8 आवर्स की होनी चाहिए थी, या 8 आवर्स की शिफ्ट बनानी चाहिए थी, क्रिएट करनी चाहिए थी ब्लिंकिट को, या अप्रूव नहीं करनी चाहिए थी। 12 घंटे बहुत ज़्यादा हो जाते हैं। एक तरीके से राइडर के ऊपर एक तरीके से ना फोर्स आ जाता है, प्रेशर आ जाता है बहुत। वो एक फ्रीडम नहीं फील कर पाता है, बहुत प्रेशर में रहता है वो। बट उसे करता है इसलिए कि मजबूरी के लिए करता है, फैमिली के लिए करता है, फाइनेंशियल इशू है।
पीछे थक जाते हैं, 4-5 घंटा सोते हैं खाली रात में। 12-1 बजे सोएंगे, फिर 5-6 बजे उठ जाएंगे।
इस काम को लंबे समय तक के लिए कोई नहीं कर सकता, मैं क्या कोई नहीं कर सकता, क्योंकि सीढ़ियाँ ऊपर नीचे चढ़ना पड़ता है। अब कोई बंदा मजबूरी में करे वो तो अलग बात हो जाएगी, लेकिन लंबे समय के लिए कोई नहीं कर पाएगा कि ये वो 30-40 साल तक कर ले काम, ये नहीं कर पाएगा।
पर 3rd फ्लोर का भी ऑर्डर होता है, 4th फ्लोर का भी होता है। अब 20 kg वेट है, उसको आप अकेले कैरी करके ले जाओगे तो टफ होता है थोड़ा, बट करना पड़ता है।
अपने बाहर के लोगों को लगता है, लोग बोलते हैं डिलीवरी बॉय है, इज्जत कम करते हैं। बट कोई काम, बोलते हैं ना, शाहरुख खान का एक डायलॉग है, ये काम कोई छोटा बड़ा नहीं होता, काम काम होता है। ठीक है, जिस जिस चीज़ से आपका पेट पले उस काम में कभी शर्म नहीं करना।
Hello, hi everyone. Thanks for Khoj for inviting me and all the other great panelists today. Today I want to talk about this. I think Aditi will be talking a lot about framing the histories of gig work, and like gig work is not something new. Gig work is something which has existed in India for a long time, and with that, it also comes to my today's presentation is talking about how we can see caste and histories of caste within gig work and platform work in India, especially the interfaces of these platforms. Today, I'll be talking about 3 platforms and how to trace caste within them. The first platform is Zomato. In March 2024, Zomato announced a pure veg mode for its app. The pure veg mode would only allow pure vegetarian restaurants, will only show pure vegetarian restaurants to the customers. And pure vegetarian is something which does not serve any meat. Pure is absence of meat. It's not a category by itself, it's a category by exclusion. Further, the pure veg delivery would be handled by a completely separate fleet of drivers who would be dressed in green uniform instead of the Zomato's red branding. This pure veg fleet would only carry pure veg food for pure veg customers, eliminating any possibilities of contamination with any impure food and people who eat or handle it. Despite the myths of India being a vegetarian nation, surveys show up to 75% of Indians eat meat. Meat eating is especially common among caste oppressed groups and minorities, and that's where the phrasing of pure veg emerges from. Minorities and marginalized castes are ostracized, discriminated against, even lynched to death on suspicion of eating meat. Pure vegetarians don't often allow non-vegetarians to sit on the same tables and stay in the same housing complexes as them. Pure vegetarianism acts as a coded signifier of one's proximity to a pure upper caste identity. Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar, in fact, traces the origins of untouchability to practices of eating beef, arguing that eating beef became the boundary between the touchables and untouchables in India, a status assigned at birth. Dalits or erstwhile untouchables have historically been tasked with disposing of cow carcasses in a village. Dalit communities would then use different parts of cow. For example, cow skin was used for leatherwork, and many would eat the cow meat. The cow, when alive, is worshipped by the touchables, including the vegetarians, but the same cow, when dead, becomes dirty and untouchable, along with the people who dispose and handle it. Thus, aspirations and claims to being pure veg have originated in tandem with caste-based division of labor and rooted in untouchability. Within this context, Zomato claimed a feature that furthers notions of purity and pollution of food through its language, visuals, and interface through the literal segregation of workers as a casteless decision purely based on market research. The next platform I want to talk about is Book My Buy. I think you can see the very interesting interface they have. Buy in colloquially in Hindi now means a maid in most of North India. Book My Buy is an online maid agency. On its website, users can browse through the workers in a grid-like interface with their personal details such as name, marital status, gender, age, skills, hometown, etc. mentioned. Somewhere else, the platform suggests customers hire married couple as a combo at a discounted rate instead of hiring them individually. The platform lists how a married couple's increased economic reliance, reduced negotiation power, and lack of freedom are actually an advantage for the customers. They even offer replacements if workers leave for some reason. Book My Buy's interface and language presents marginalized caste domestic workers as artifacts in a marketplace, thus transforming their bodies into a product that can be browsed, compared, replaced, and refunded. Elsewhere, Book My Buy maintains a public... This is a very interesting ad by Book My Buy. Elsewhere, Book My Buy maintains a public blacklist of workers reported by employers for absconding and theft. In India, domestic workers from marginalized castes are often falsely accused of theft because of casteist biases. Assumed and default criminality of marginalized castes is an essential pillar of the Indian caste system. Meanwhile, the platform does not have any processes for vetting and reporting customers who often financially, economically, physically, and sexually harass domestic workers. Urban housework in India is mired at an intersection of casteism and gender system of labor that restricts occupational mobility. 2/3 of domestic workers who are women from marginalized castes. When upper caste women are employed for housework, one rarely sees them performing sanitation labor, and when Dalit and Adivasi workers are hired, one rarely sees them employed in childcare or cooking. This is because of the caste system where one's place in social hierarchy is tied to the community's traditional occupation. A ritual hierarchy of labor bolstered by religious scriptures like the Manusmriti forms a close relationship between respectability and caste. In practice, this translates into forms of respectable or cerebral labor, like knowledge, production, administrative, and cultural work being performed largely by upper caste. Meanwhile, manual labor tends to be done by caste further down the hierarchy. Consequently, the work is considered dirty or impure is still done largely by caste considered untouchables. Domestic work is a gender and caste coded profession. I think it's repetition, sorry. Then final platform I want to talk about is MyGate. MyGate, I think most of you who are living in it's a condition of the Indian economy right now that if you want to feel safe, you live in a gated society. I think most people would be living in some form of these societies which are controlled by these platforms. MyGate is a gate management system for gated communities in India, provides an interface for residents to track the attendance, movement, and performance of their domestic workers. This is an interface for MyGate. A worker is registered onto the platform by submitting their personal documents, getting their bags checked every day at entry and exit, and having their movements tracked through cameras and logging systems. Meanwhile, the workers don't have any consent in how their data is collected, used by residents, and shared with third parties. Further, there is no worker app or interface or a way to meaningfully interact with the MyGate platform. It's totally asymmetrical. Only customers can interact with the workers, but the workers cannot interact back. Housing in urban India is segregated across caste and class lines. Members of upper caste who tend to have higher class mobility live in affluent colonies and community with other upper caste residents, away from the caste oppressed. Marginalized castes are often discriminated against when renting or buying property in gated communities, with a higher proportion of members from upper castes. For example, townships are made exclusively for Brahmins, Jains, and other upper castes. Gated communities dovetail within the caste and class anxieties of upper caste. These communities create a physical barrier to protect the space and the inhabitants inside the gate with well-built homes, swimming pools, and parks. These gates are manned by security guards, often from the marginalized castes themselves, who must follow strict protocols for entry and exit into the community. Residents of these gated communities nevertheless rely on the critical labor of castes who do domestic work, sanitation work, home services, delivery work, and more. On caste discrimination against workers is rampant within these gated communities. They are not allowed to drink water, not allowed to take lifts, not allowed to rest in the community space, and all of this so that they do not pollute the residents, they do not make the spaces dirty. And the residents are more likely to from upper castes. My gate allows residents disproportionate oversight and control over workers' livelihoods, movements. A worker's entry pass can be revoked at any point. They can be given poor ratings that can reduce their employability, or they can be harassed for taking emergency leaves or for sickness or someone's death. The workers are left at the mercy of the customers. Extensive surveillance of workers stems from Brahminical notions of distress and use the language of security to maintain boundaries of caste within these communities. The app's interface offers new mechanisms for worker control, reaffirming residents' anxieties of caste and class. This form of caste is embedded in most platforms we deal with today, and it can emerges in different forms. It can be like Zomato imposes its Brahminical view through the pure veg filters, or how workers are not treated with dignity, the asymmetry, and the what we are I think we're talking earlier about also gamification mechanism. There are tools through which a worker's experience is gamified and played with. But I think for me, the most important thing about understanding caste and Indian platform design is how we imagine problems. I think if we see most of the tech innovation work happening in India is of mediation of labor. We don't have any other innovation. We have Zomato will launch food delivery, then it will launch grocery delivery, then there will be laundry delivery, and then there's different ways of imagining problems. Meanwhile, the country has a huge problem of inequality. We have sanitation work which has not been automated yet, but we keep talking about this limited imagination of problems of the upper caste and how can we mediate labors to fix them. Interesting thing we found during our research was that Dipinder Goyal, again a great guy, amazing person, should definitely read his tweets. He has actually announced that Blinkit has erased casteism and classism because now you can see it with your eyes, so it's not invisible anymore. He has visibilized inequality in society. So interestingly, we were doing some research and found that during a lot of the Zomato saga, Dipinder Goyal was saying that, hey, we don't see caste, because we are casteless, and I don't even know my caste. I mean, his name is signifier, but he said, I don't even know my caste. This was purely done on market research. But when we went through so Zomato has a lot of DEI documents on the website, and this caste is not mentioned anywhere. It has all the other keywords, but it does not have caste anywhere in 7 or 8 documents we went through. But I mean, Zomato also put out a casteist ad 2 years back, so I don't know how it works. I think another thing we're thinking about is how caste becomes invisible. And there are several mechanisms to that. First is definitely how the tech sector in India is composed and how the VC sector is composed by a very specific group, which you see. A very interesting thing I found was that in talking about food is Licious as a platform has talked extensively about difficulty in having funding. When they were trying to launch a meat-based brand, no one was funding them. And even in their packaging right now, you don't see any meat. There's a human made there. They don't show meat in their visual packaging. They show a human for some reason. Like there's like some name, and you have to relate to the human instead of talking about how this is actually meat we are eating, which is not pure. So there's a lot of composition of tech sector and VC sector. Also the question of user, the framing of user, who the user is. I don't understand, when we frame a user, a Zomato platform is a customer as a user, but also has the worker as a user. But the framing of the user-centered design or human-centered design in India does not consider the worker as a human. The worker is someone less than human, and the design is only for the customer as human. So that is something also reimagining how we think about who the user is. And also reality is that caste is a fundamental accomplice to capitalism in India, and it's also constructed within our nation state, where I think we talked about how Blinkit's supposedly stopped 10-minute delivery, but that actually did not do anything. It's just a marketing, like it's a marketing gimmick by the government now, but it still does 10-minute delivery. So somewhere, I mean, also uh, somewhere down the line, the whole nation state functions on caste. That's why we also have we don't have data on deaths of sanitation workers right now. So that's something I wanted to talk about. And finally, I wanted to say that of course, creation of caste effectively helps in producing environments where casteism emerges as the default, because it is seen as a natural order of things in business and society and technical and consumer logic. If we want to totally annihilate caste from these platforms, we need to start seeing them and visibilizing them, which and annihilation of caste must be intentional. It cannot be expected by default. Yeah, another plug. You can. It's part of a larger essay which has a lot more detailed tracing of caste histories on these platforms. You can scan and read on at the QR code. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I am a sociologist, not a designer or artist, so I have not dared to make slides to show everyone. You're just going to have to listen to me for a few minutes. But before I begin, I want to say thank you to Pooja and Mila for bringing us together and hosting this. It has been an exceptional 2 days. And I hope to just add a little bit more to what this already very knowledgeable audience knows about what technology is doing to our lives. And I guess I should start a little bit by telling you who I am and why you're listening to me today. So I'm a researcher at the Indian Institute for Human Settlements, and my work is in sociology, urban sociology, and the political economy. And when I began my work on gig workers on platform workers in 2015, I asked what seemed like a straightforward comparative question. If all of the work in our cities is informal and does not have contracts or is not or workers don't have labor rights through their work, then what does the platform do to change that? And I'll keep my remarks today to platform workers who work on city streets, food delivery, taxi drivers, tradespeople, like people we've been hearing about. But my question analytically was quite simple. What happens when you work in someone's household as a driver? What happens when you work on a platform as a driver? What does it do to your experience of risk? How does it shape your life? And as I dug deeper, I realized that platforms weren't just a type of technology, nor simply a new kind of consumer play. There were assemblages of both, a form of capitalism, what I've come to call techno-capitalist assemblages, that arrived in Indian cities as marketplaces or matchmaking businesses wrapped in software. And to forefront the bodies and experiences of people who work on these, the question I kept turning to was about risk. In the context where most job options come without legally binding contracts, without labor rights, without work-based social security, what does platform mediation actually change about the way a worker perceives and experiences risk? And that question was for me a way to try and break through this uncomfortable truth that we have around us. As David also said, people do find something valuable about this work, whether it is something they have to do, whether it's something they want to do. We have to contend with this question. And so my question again was more specifically, when algorithmic management lands in a place like India, with its long histories of informal work, its structures of caste and social debt, its particular modes of negotiation, how does risk play out across these capitalist logics? What the anthropologist Anna Singh calls friction, the way international modes of capitalism encounter and transform local conditions when they land in place. The question led me to an image that many of us have actually seen today. A taxi driver parked precariously on the side of a street, about to be moved by the traffic police. A delivery worker on a bike, phone mounted on the handlebar, waiting outside a restaurant in the rain. The phone screen glows, he's looking at it, but he's also looking past at the sky, calculating how much longer will this take? Can he make 3 more deliveries before the roads flood? Does he have enough battery and charge to last him through the evening peak? This image contains the question I want us to sit with today. Where is the work happening? Is the work happening in his body, navigating traffic and weather? Is it in the algorithm routing him across the city? Is it in the household where someone else is managing the risks that he's taking on? The answer, I argue, is happening across all three. And that this distribution, this spreading out of labor across multiple sites, is the actual work that platforms do. And so today I want to take us through these 3 scenes, 3 sites where platform work happens, not to give you a comprehensive map, but to show you how these techno-capitalist assemblages reorganize the relationships between bodies, households, and digital interfaces. And what I'll argue is that algorithmic management and platform mediation doesn't replace capitalist logics of existing markets, but it plays out, intensifies, redistributes the violence across these 3 sites, in ways that make extraction harder to trace and therefore harder to resist. Scene 1, the street. Let's stay on the street for a moment because this is where platforms want us to look when they think about gig work. The rider, the driver, the visible moving body that connects consumer demand to fulfillment. But here's what's interesting. In India, platforms sell themselves on the promise of organizing the chaos of Indian streets to consumers, to investors, and to the government. The pitch is always the same. Our cities are messy, unknowable, and inefficient. Informal labor is reliable, trust is broken, time is wasted. Platforms will fix this. Yesterday, Ritom showed us a tweet by the CEO, Dipinder Goyal, whose name has been taken far too many times for any good-meaning people. But the tweet said that any protesting workers were distrustful. And Yatharth's presentation has also shown how distrustful bodies are created. Except, of course, that Indian streets aren't that chaotic. They function through extraordinary, sophisticated systems of tacit knowledge about traffic patterns, festival calendars, neighborhood hierarchies, weather cycles, peak hours, and safe routes. Sense-making is localized. The auto driver knows which police checkpoints to avoid, the local delivery person who understands building politics and knows which guard will let him through in the back. In my research on home services platforms in Bangalore, that is, people who do work of carpentry, electrical work, and plumbing, I found something revealing. These are services with deep histories in the city. Unlike food delivery, for decades, workers and clients negotiated prices through tacit processes. How much do you pay a carpenter? It depends on the relationship they have with you, the neighborhood they're in, his last name, the scale of work, your ability to haggle, his need for the job. There is no formal minimum wage floors. The price emerged through social negotiation. Platforms arrived and productized these services. They set base fees, they created standardized pricing, and in doing so, they didn't organize chaos. They extracted and commodified the tacit knowledge that made these markets work. The platform's pricing logic, driven by two-sided marketplace dynamics and investor subsidies, began undercutting adjacent informal enterprises. The carpenter, who had been negotiating his own rate, suddenly found himself competing with platform set prices he couldn't match. And that's what platforms actually do. The work that platforms actually do then is make legible what is tacit. They standardize what was negotiated and present this extraction back to us as innovation. They reveal the very thing they claim to replace, the deep embodied intelligence of informal work. And here's the paradox, and this is where it gets interesting to think about bodies and algorithms. Once this knowledge is captured and algorithmized, it's no longer about efficiency, it's about control. The worker's body becomes responsive to signals it doesn't fully understand. The routing, the search pricing, the acceptance rate requirements. The worker is no longer reading the street is being read through them and by the platform. And this creates new forms of bodily stress that aren't captured in labor debates or occupational health and safety metrics. The sleeplessness because early and late nights are peak hours too, no meals on time, no breaks on time, the constant negotiation with rain, traffic, malfunctioning bikes. The body becomes a site where the algorithmic demand meets material reality and the body absorbs the gap in between. so I move on to the second scene, the household, right? And what disappears in the process of negotiation between the algorithm and the body is that it hides certain things in the process, right? Women, for one, disabled workers, anyone for whom the street is not a safe or accessible workplace. Platform work on the street is imagined as a male, able-bodied, infinitely mobile form of work, and everyone else is written out of the circuit. And so the household then becomes the site, the second site to see what platform work is doing. It is not just, the household is not just an obvious site where people work from home as microtaskers, but also, in a more structural sense, absorbs the risks of platform work. Let me give you a very specific example. Between 2015 and 2018, in the early days of the platform economy, I interviewed over 100 Uber and Ola drivers in Bangalore to understand why they were doing this work, beginning with the same question I asked earlier. Many of them, more than we initially expected, were migrants from rural Karnataka. Many of them came from what are called eternally drought-prone districts. 16 of India's 24 such districts are in Karnataka. These are areas where climate change has made rain-fed agriculture increasingly unviable. Failed harvests, mounting debt to build borewells every year are the realities that their families face. Many said their families did not have enough water to drink through summer, let alone for agriculture. They faced the slow unraveling of agrarian livelihoods. They were primary earners for their households, these drivers, but also primary farmers in their households. They needed work that could help them move in and out of the city quickly. And earlier forms of job seeking were based on relational relationships, right? Asking your community networks, your friends to help you find jobs. Platforms understood this very well. While speaking to the head of supply strategy at Ola in about 2018, he told me he too came, and supply is is the term for what handles workers in a platform firm, right? They have supply strategists, they don't have HR professionals. While speaking to the head of supply strategy, the man who basically determined how much recruitment had to be made, how much drivers would be paid, what amount of loans had to be given out by Ola to get the right number of drivers on to meet consumer demand. He said he too came from a farming community in Karnataka. He knew agricultural distress around him. He started campaigns to recruit drivers from these districts using large posters, assuring young men that they could pay off loans for borewells if they came and worked through Bangalore in summer. And here's what that kind of freedom obscures. Their households were still doing the work of dealing with precarious agrarian livelihoods. Their households were managing risk, absorbing income volatility, providing the social infrastructure, meals, care, emotional support. They made it possible for someone to work for 3 months in Bangalore for 14 hours a day and then come back to farm in the months of rain. The platform didn't eliminate social debt, it redistributed to the household. And the platforms, I take this forward, they do something even more insidious to these households, right? They suture these agrarian and urban households into financial visibility in ways that were not required before. To access credit, make payments, to qualify insurance schemes, platform workers and their families and their households are made eligible to new systems of surveillance and extraction beyond just platform work. Bank accounts, Aadhaar cards, income tracking, credit scores. And this is not incidental. This is the strategy of our economy right now. Consumption in our domestic economy is what is driving growth. And for the government to be able to show more and more growth, more people need to consume, hence gig workers need to start taking more loans and taking more insurance packages so we can start to see more financial flows in the market. This is the business model of platform work as it lands in Indian cities. Platforms become the mechanism through which informal households are brought into formal financial circuits, not for the benefit, but on speculation. Platform workers' incomes are banked, tracked, their household becomes eligible and are forcibly sold loans and flexible credit facilities. The household becomes a site of data extraction. The risks, its needs, its vulnerabilities are all rendered visible and calculable. And here's the ethical note. This happens without meaningful consent, or rather it happens through what we might call workable consent. Consent given under conditions of economic necessity, where refusing means forfeiting livelihood. The worker agrees to financial transparency because there's no viable alternative. But we need to be clear about who's orchestrating this opening up. And this is where I feel we need to hear a little bit more about in these conversations about the role of the state, right? And what I found in my research and what has been some of my core arguments for my doctoral work is that in India, the state sutures workers into the market just as much as the platform does, hand in hand with them, right? Through these financialized products, and it sutures workers into back to platforms through the new welfare boards that have been proposed in the country. Let me unpack this. When we talk about platform precarity, it's well known to this audience what the platform problem is: exploitative companies, weak labor protections, and the need for regulation. But it misses something fundamental. The state is not a neutral regulator trying to protect workers from platforms. The state is actively complicit, if not directly involved, in platform mediation, creating the scenario for the financialization of precarious lives. In India, new labor laws choose to give platform workers access to social security, but not labor rights. They use the institution of welfare boards, an institution used earlier in our history to regulate informal workers. The access to social security is predicated on platforms telling a government, a city or a state, who their workers are. Platforms mediate a worker's identity to the state, not just the market for credit products. They quote unquote regularity of platform incomes as compared to mistrustful informal economy incomes make platform workers okay to use market-based health insurance and medical insurance rather than in-kind public health services. I wonder how many people in this room have had an easy time getting payback from an insurance company. The financial inclusion schemes that bring households into these banking systems. The state doesn't regulate platforms from the outside. It partners with them to bring workers into these circuits of debt, data extraction, and market legibility. It overturns generational knowledge that worker families have had in managing risks of income volatility or unpredictability of work. Families have navigated risk for generations: harvest failures, caste discrimination, climate shocks, relational economies, and now navigating algorithmic risk, financialization, with the scrutiny in times of vulnerability. Their old strategies don't work anymore. What platforms hide entire circuits of social reproduction, care, and risk management that were already functioning, and they intensify the value extraction from them. This reveals that worker precarity is not just an aberration of the platform economy, but a feature of state-mediated capitalism. The platform is just the latest interface through which the state and capital collaborate to reorganize informal labor. And this gets at something crucial that's often lost in global discourses about platform work, which is that in the global south, in the majority world, handling multiple short-term gigs has been common practice for many kinds of workers. Formal employment has never been the standard. Gig work was the standard. Platforms are primarily a new means to facilitate and govern this work and to make it extractable in new ways. And finally, I'll end with scene 3, the interface, the app itself, the algorithm. And in my work, I've always studied up, not just studied workers. I've also studied firms and the people who work in these firms because they deserve just as much scrutiny as every single worker who comes to pick us up does. And like I said, I spend a lot of time speaking to supply and operations folks who do the day-to-day management of workers. They set neighborhood-level algorithms. They determine how many workers are required in different neighborhoods, and they help deal with spot protests that take place as services are rendered in city spaces. And what we're witnessing amongst these teams is perhaps the most problematic legacy of platform work, a profound rewiring of workplace relationships based on the intense adoption of technologies. The interface, the supply and operations folks that I spoke to were very clear in helping me understand I'll close up soon. Were very clear in helping me understand when I asked them, do you think workers would understand the algorithm or the decisions you're making if you just shared it with them? They said that is not in our interest. They're too illiterate. We can't trust that they'll hold this information carefully. And this was heard over several types of companies over about 5 years of investigating platform firms. Barring some companies who worked only specifically with work from home women who had a more social enterprise nature to them. I will kind of wrap up very quickly. I think I'm out of time. I want to end with this fact that platform mediation, of course, creates poor working conditions. Poor working conditions are the legacy of our economy. So we need to look beyond just what happens without the standard employment relationship and look at how negotiation with these platform and interfaces have larger impacts. Thank you so much.
May I invite the people on the panel to come on board? That was a fantastic set of presentations, so much to learn from. And I especially appreciate the way Aditi ended by reminding us of the role of the state. Anyone who has not yet read the 4 new labor codes should do so to see exactly what they have done to the question of time and the intensity of labor. I have many questions to ask all of you, but I will hold them in abeyance for the audience. Yes, sir.
My question is for Aditi. So you were very critical about the state when it comes to encouraging the gig economy. If you look at what the World Economic Forum is saying, they're saying the future is about gig work. And they're talking about lifelong employability vis-a-vis lifelong employment. So where is the problem? The informal sector, these gig workers, they're getting access to credit, they're getting access to banking. Thanks to algorithms, they're getting access to loans, insurance. So where is the problem? Tell me. And this whole gig work, this is getting into tier 2, 3, 4, 5, where there was no gig work, there was no app, there was no formal employment. So where's the problem?
It's bad quality work. That's my problem with it. And so my problem is that I don't think this is a we can talk over lunch. There are many panelists and many questions. The question I've raised is a two-sided. We have to hold many truths together. Our economy has to grow. We have geopolitical pressures to compete with. Technology is seen as innovation that will lead the way. And India has to have a strong role in that. At the same time, our domestic priorities should reflect the protection of our citizens, right? That comes with lifelong employability, it comes with skilling, it comes with good quality work where people feel dignified, people are able to sleep, they are able to take restroom breaks when they need to, and they can eat when they need to. It's quite simple.
Thank you. My question is for Yatharth. I've been actually following your work for quite a long while, and I also follow you on Instagram. But my question was that tech industry and VC funds, these industries and these funds sort of appeal to the normative sense of the Indian society, which is, as you mentioned in your presentation, casteism. And an article by Ambedkarian Chronicle also mentioned how marginalized caste labor in the gaming industry is exploited, and how there's a caste dynamic in there. So, and I asked this question as a artist and a student from a marginalized community. What do you think we can do as artists, as marginalized, as creators, and let's say tech workers from marginalized communities to help our communities and to make sure our labor is not extracted? I mean, it's a big question. We can have a big discussion on this, but what would you say as like a researcher on caste and design particularly?
I mean, there are two parts of the problem. First is definitely the way money flows and the way the capital has been accumulated in certain groups in India, and global. There's a global north-south divide, and in India there's like a caste divide and class divide. That is definitely a factor which what problems get solved, what problems get attention, whose life matters. But as people who come from these backgrounds, I think the biggest impact is to start talking about it. And also, like, I don't think there's an easy solution that, I mean, there's no funding, there's no money. That's the truth. But with whatever resources we have to go back to our people and talk about it, and I'm very glad you came to the space and asked this question, because our first duty is to our people, and to start solving those problems, start talking about those problems, start documenting these things. And if the funding is not in India, skip India. Like, go to the masters of your masters. Yeah, that's my answer.
There was a question there, here.
This is an open question. Like I read an article few days ago where the startup company's CEO and the employers also find overworking is normal. So what is your take on this?
I mean, from what I experienced speaking to the writers, I think that certainly a lot of them. I mean, they spoke about, on one hand, having this freedom to kind of work 2 hours a day, 4 hours a day, but inevitably they ended up working 13, 14, even more, 15 hours a day. And I think, I mean, I can't really speak on behalf of what's normal working hours in India, but I can definitely say that the structure of the algorithm and the platform really specifically pushes their workforce into working these hours. I think this freedom that's presented is kind of an illusion, in that to actually make a meaningful wage, a living wage, and support your family, they're having to work like 16 hours a day, sort of sleep 5 hours a night, and do it 7 days a week. And it's, for me, that seems obviously seems well in excess of what should be happening. But I can't kind of make any comment upon what's kind of standard practice. But it seems incredibly excessive from my perspective.
Tara, may I ask you, because you talk about resistance to the time of work through other forms, how would you respond to this question of overworking being normal?
Well,
Perhaps use the mic.
is it working?
Is it?
Is the question what is the question exactly?
I mean, the gentleman asked the question about the normalization of overwork. And I think what was very interesting in what you showed was the ways in which people resisted the theft of time.
Yeah, I guess I just find it all quite inhumane, and yeah. And I think, was it Narayan Murthy or Nandan Nilekani who also received a lot of flack recently for talking about it? Yeah. I guess, yeah, in all my work, I've just been thinking about how these systems are finding more and more efficient ways of, like, controlling our bodies. And yeah, I guess it's to their benefit for the bodies to do more.
We have very little time. So I'm going to say Ali Akbar, Ashish, and Marcella. 3 quickly. Yes, please.
Hi. Okay, I'm going to keep this very quick. Coming from a context of Finland and Helsinki, I just wanted to kind of point out that food delivery services like Wolt, Israeli owned, are employing primarily people who are migrants, who are primarily black, brown, coming from South Asia or parts of Africa like Sudan or Somalia. And there is a question of overwork there as well. And there's also a question of kind of a segregatory labor practice there. And you would tend to see people who are black, brown, people of color bodies doing extra work to a point where a Volt delivery person may earn up to 5,000 euros a month. And what happened a couple of months ago was that the state decided that it is impossible for a Volt delivery person to be earning that much, and so there is some kind of a financial fraud at play, and so this person was deported. So, I just wanted to kind of highlight and bring, and thinking about what you said, Yatharth, that if it's not working in India, you go somewhere else. I would like to say that somewhere else also it's not working. But also this highlighting this notion of what you talked about the similarities or the overlaps between the techno-fascism of the state and the platforms of the gig economy, where it doesn't really kind of seem clear as to who's learning from whom and where are we kind of heading, and this kind of a necropolitical kind of condition. So maybe, could you maybe talk about it at some point of time over lunch?
No, there's two more that I've got to get, and the rest we have to take to lunch. I'm sorry.
I'll be very short. Fantastic interventions. I wanted to ask if in your practice or research, because in more traditional workplace, you see like physical workplace maybe, emerging mechanisms of solidarity and class solidarity amongst workers. And what happens when you have like that kind of fragmented and isolated work, if there are like emerging networks of support. And also I was interested in one of the things that they were saying, like the stratification of the workers, if they replicate or internalize like a caste division based on, oh, I am diamond or platinum or silver, or if they bond this together over that.
Ashish?
Yeah, thanks for that. Maybe this is also to be discussed over lunch in the coming days, and maybe Shuddha could help take this forward. I mean, I was listening to all the presentation. I was saying, so what? Very, very important, something we should all be concerned about, but where does it take us? And then I suddenly wondered as to whether it's not taking us to the question, which is it possible that we could be producing a working class for the first time ever? In the full sense of the term. I mean, it had never occurred to me quite like that for 2-3 reasons. One is that, it's astonishing how much Grundrisse and volume 1 of Capital speaks to the situation. In a way, it's never done in modern Indian history. Point one, I mean, we've had histories and histories of the working class in Bombay, in the textile industries and the jute workers in Calcutta, proving again and again why that is not a working class. The other thing is this extraordinary classical situation of, I mean, again, the point we're making about the fact that there is no employer, that person is not there. You actually have the abstracted conditions of employment, theoretically defined, that produce the classical conditions of the expropriation of capital. Again, your point about the whole thing about the urban-rural situation, the thing about the fact that these people are actually being inducted into the capitalist system, given the credit, I mean, somehow it had never occurred to me that this is the working class. Once you say that, then of course the question arises as to the larger history of the working classes, the conservative turn of working classes, who these people vote for example, all those questions might arise. I mean, Trump is eventually the ultimate representative of the working class in the United States. And there would be other political questions that arise. I just wanted to say that it had never occurred to me quite like this. So,
yeah. Thank you. Quick responses, if you have any.
I just wanted to clarify, when I meant skip India, I mean get funding from Bahar. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Ashish. I mean, that has been my point for the last 10 years, which I have tried to argue with people.
It's not 10 years old, though.
Huh?
This working class.
No, but the problem, the question started before with the left movement and the trade union movement, who sort of kept saying for a long time there is no working class. And I said, are you crazy? Do you have any contact with reality? We are witnessing the greatest amount of proletarization in the entire history from the late 19th century onwards till now. And then the question of whether this is an organizable class or not came up. I just want to end by saying, we have eaten 36 minutes into lunch, which is not a humane thing to do. So we will continue. Since this conference is called Notes from the Digital Underground, it's a slight gesture towards Fyodor Dostoevsky, who wrote Notes from the Underground. And his first note is, the world can go to hell. Nothing shall come between me and my tea or between me and my lunch. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you all. By the way, just one more note. Keep in mind, yesterday, Devendra Fadnavis, Chief Minister of Maharashtra, said they're working on an AI that will be able to distinguish migrant workers by accent. And if you now begin to look at the intersection of surveillance mechanisms that will supposedly deport and identify Bangladeshis and migrant work in cities like Delhi, Bombay, Hyderabad, Bangalore, we're in for a whole new game. Thank you very much.